the whole town is exploded.
Here in the Joy Theater,
the lights went out and then the ceiling came in.
KWTX had a reporter broadcasting what the damage looked like.
Well, it looked like a battlefield.
About that time is when it started getting bad. I never had a chance to get out of the car.
All hell had broken loose. It was described at that time as the monster from the sky.
On Thursday, May 11th, KWTX will be airing a special documentary, Monster from the Sky, that looks back at the historic tornado that tore through downtown Waco on May 11th, 1953. I'm joined with Chief Meteorologist Brady Taylor, who has been working on this documentary for about a year now, right? And Brady, I just want to ask you this question first. Why did you want to do this documentary?
Well, you know, I've been a meteorologist here in Waco for nearly 18 years, and most people from Waco know that the tornado was a historic one. It was the first F5 official to ever touch down. It got rated that back in the 70s, so after the tornado hit. It's the deadliest tornado to ever hit the state of Texas, 114 killed. But I knew it did a lot of damage downtown, but I didn't know much of the stories behind. So yeah, about last May, June, I started kind of digging into it a little bit, and I was like, started seeing stuff, and I was learning more. I was like, man, this is interesting. And I went to my boss, our GM, and said, you know, it'd be good if we did something. He's like, what do you want to do? I was like, I have no clue. So I kind of dug into it, met more people, and yeah, just really found more stories that just, you know, it's a big storm, but when you hear the stories firsthand, it's even crazier than that.
Yeah, so people who are, you know, going to be watching this documentary, what are some of the things that they can see? You
know, you're going to see a lot of pictures that most people probably have never seen. We were very lucky to work with the Texas collection at Baylor. They have tons of pictures. When I first went there, they were like, yeah, we have a bunch of pictures. We're talking probably thousands of pictures that we went through, and these are original pictures that just look amazing. But we also, through the Texas collection, are going to get to use some 60mm film that's never been developed or digitized. So this will be the first time they've ever been broadcast. And you're going to get to hear some firsthand reports from people that are still alive now, but also the oral history program at Baylor set down back in the 80s with a lot of people that were in this storm. So we hear their accounts as well. So you're going to see pictures and video that have never been seen, hear stories that have never been told. And again, kind of our goal is to let the people tell the story of that day.
So let's go back to that day. What, you know, we have severe weather now that rolls through, and we talk about the setup. What was the weather setup that day?
You know, a lot of times in May you get these hot, humid days, but there was the threat for tornadoes. Now, interesting, back in 1953, the National Weather Service didn't even exist. It was the Weather Bureau, and the closest Weather Bureau office was in New Orleans. Wow. So we were just getting at the very infancy of even kind of knowing what was going on with tornadoes. So there was kind of an alert, say, hey, today you need to watch out. Earlier in the afternoon, around 2:30 or so, an F4 tornado touched down in San Angelo, killed, I believe, 13 people. Later that day, the tornado hit Waco, again, killed 114 people, was on the ground for 23 miles. And then later in the evening, another storm touched down, kind of in the area where you would put I-45 now. The interstate didn't exist back then, but yeah, very stormy day in central Texas.
Man, and then so the title, Monster from the Sky, like what made you want to name it that?
Yeah, so we had, you'll hear in the promo and stuff where the person says that was a person actually who lived through it. And there was an insurance group kind of meeting afterwards, and they labeled it that, and in some of the newspaper, they called it the Monster from the Sky. So we thought, hey, that kind of fits well. And, you know, it was one of those setups that day where a lot of times in central Texas, we get these high moisture, muggy days, and it was a rain-wrapped storm. So the scary thing is nobody ever saw the tornado come in. So there's no pictures of it or anything like that. But it was a rain-wrapped storm, and a lot of people talk it went from kind of your normal hot, humid day to thunderstorm activity kind of bubbling up to probably softball-sized hail, and then a tornado that just tore through. I mean, you couldn't have picked a worse place at a worse time. Downtown Waco, if you've never been to Waco, the intersection of 5th and Austin is where it hit. And back in 1953, that was kind of the center of kind of the business district there, and hit at 4:40 in the afternoon when that area was just piled up with people.
Yeah, and you think about Monster from the Sky, like some of the images that I've even seen of you going through it, that's really what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't really know what that was way back then, the first of its kind.
Yeah, the crazy thing is the Waco, so there's a big legend that the Waco Indians or Waco Indians lived here. They settled here because they said tornadoes would never hit here. And back in 1953, there were still people that believed that. And yeah, not only did that storm produce probably 200+ mile-per-hour winds, but you also got to remember some of these buildings that were down there were pre-1900. So they were wood buildings, brick facade, no steel structure, and just collapsed and fell into the roads. And yeah, you're talking 5, 6-story buildings that were pummeled down to nothing pretty much. And that was what's scary with it.
And so I know you saw a lot of different things. What was, I guess, something that is going to stick with you after all of this? I know it may be hard to nail down one, but
no, there's so many crazy stories, and I think that's the biggest thing that you take away from it. Just, I think too, probably the biggest thing after going through all of it, yes, it was a horrible storm, all kinds of damage, but how quickly people ran into to help. So you got to think a 5, 6-story building just collapsed in the road, a third of a mile wide storm tears a path through town, and it was still raining, it was still storming. There were still people worried more tornadoes may come in, but people went running in as fast as they could. You'll hear in the documentary story from a man named Claude Kincannon. So he was a senior at Baylor, and he went running in and went in, he's in the National Guard. He went to the armory, but he was so close to town, he got there before any of the really officials got there, changed into what he needed to and ran out. And he spent 7 days working in the deal. So by the time he finally got home, he got a knock on his door, and it was the National Guard because they declared him AWOL because he had never checked in.
Wow.
So he was like, I wasn't AWOL, I was here working the whole time. So stuff like that, where people risk their life and limb to try to help other people. But you can still see some of the impacts even 70 years later downtown, as we talk about that some as well, where parking lots are now. There was buildings there. So we try to talk a little bit about the architecture, but really the people's stories of the people that went through it, but also the people that went in to help those people as well.
yeah, I mean, those are important stories because back then there also wasn't this platform now for you to share these stories.
Yeah, and one really cool thing you'll see is, so before KWTX TV, we were in 1955, there was KWTX Radio, the AM station, and we have about a 3.5-minute clip solid of kind of what they were seeing and talking. Yeah, they had to call the National Guard in, and there were some people we talked with that, you have this big of a tornado hit downtown Waco. When they drove home, their family didn't know it happened. There was no way to know, and the weather was only really bad right in that real corridor right there. So it's a crazy thing nowadays with social media and TV and all that. All the stuff spreads quickly, but yeah, they were completely surprised, even the people that didn't live in Waco.
All right, so before we go, one more time, when does it air, and then where can people watch it?
Yeah, so it's May 11th at 6 p.m. on KWTX and KWTX.com, and that's where you can watch it. And a big thank you to Texas Farm Bureau. They are working with us. We'll be able to air it commercial free. So an hour-long documentary. It'll cover up our 6 p.m. newscast. But again, if you can't catch it right at 6, it'll be on our website, kwtx.com/Waco Tornado is where it is. So big thank you to Texas Farm Bureau. Also to the Texas Collection. They rolled out the red carpet. We've got some amazing pictures, video, and then the oral history program opening up. But yeah, I think it tells a good story of that day, what caused it, what happened, the wild stories of that day, and again, how the city of Waco kind of embraced those folks, worked to save as many as they could, and kind of recovered from the storm.